Vladimir Putin's greatest weapon is not the hypersonic missile or the Iskander or even these intercontinental ballistic missiles without their nuclear warhead, the foreboding Oreshnik ballistic missile that he says he's going to start mass producing. I don't think he could mass produce chips, but there we are. His sharpest instrument is propaganda, a tool meticulously designed by Putin to exuviate dissent and drape his imperial ambitions in the tattered cloak of historical grievance and cultural unity. Yet this propaganda war is one the West has often misjudged, mistakenly believing that it targets us rather than the very people Putin claims to protect and lead. The myth of Novorossiya, a term conjured to evoke nostalgia for a bygone Russian empire, exemplifies the Kremlin's duplicitous narrative. Historically, Novorossiya referred to territories north of the Black Sea annexed by Catherine the Great and later incorporated into the Soviet Union. For Putin, it's become the ideological scaffolding for his 2014 invasion of Donbass and Crimea. Yet as Dr. John Rosenbeek observes, and I'm going to quote, Novorossiya exists mostly in the minds of a small group of ideologues. In reality, the project was stillborn. Opinion polls have consistently shown that even Russian-speaking Ukrainians overwhelmingly support Ukraine's sovereignty. And a 2014 study indicated that only 20 to 25% of residents in the targeted oblasts supported the idea of joining Russia. Despite years of Kremlin propaganda, branding Kyiv as a fascist regime and fabricating stories of genocide, the myth of Novorossiya never really took root. And yet it was never challenged. It was never challenged. And the Wagner Brigade had infiltrated the Donbass. The Wagner Brigade had infiltrated Crimea and was sowing dissent, and particularly sowing this propaganda. And the West did nothing to challenge it. From the outset, the Novorossiya project was plagued by incoherence. Figures like Pavel Gubarev, self-styled People's Governor of Donetsk, envisaged a high-tech state that aligned culturally with the Russian world. Alexander Dugin, meanwhile, fantasized about a Cossack freeman empire. However, the downing of Flight Mk17 in July 2014 shattered any remaining legitimacy. The Kremlin's direct involvement in the war and the massacre of 298 civilians turned Novorossiya into political poison. By 2015, the Confederation of Novorossiya was officially disbanded, with Moscow citing the Minsk agreements. In truth, it was abandoned because it had become a liability. As Rosenbeek aptly notes, the failure of Novorossiya speaks to a broader inability to articulate an ideological justification for the existence of the DNR and the LNR. Francis Starr of BBC Monitoring highlights that Russian media functions as an unofficial propaganda machine for Putin. I know this because I was targeted myself by NTV. State-run television dominates the airwaves, with 60% of Russians relying on it for news. Shows like 60 Minutes spew anti-Western venom and regale audiences with exaggerated accounts of Russia's military prowess, including fanciful claims about the Poseidon torpedo capable of unleashing tsunamis upon American shores. The propaganda isn't merely for external consumption, and that is the point. And that is the point that we seem to have failed to understand. It is aimed squarely at the Russian people. By monopolizing narratives, Putin ensures his grip on power. Western governments fail to grasp this. We dismiss his messaging as crude and transparent, forgetting it's not designed for us, but to consolidate support domestically and suppress dissent. The West's negligence, and this is a serious charge, in countering this propaganda is a strategic error. Pat McFadden, speaking at the NATO Cyber Defense Conference, warns that Russia's hybrid warfare extends beyond misinformation to cyber attacks capable of plunging nations into darkness. With a cyber attack, Russia can turn the lights off for millions of people, McFadden says. Yet even as we fortify our digital defences, we must recognise that the ideological battlefield is equally critical. Russia's failure to sell Novorossiya to Ukrainians underscores how effective counter-narratives can be. Kyiv's success in building a resilient Ukrainian identity stands as a rebuke to Moscow's lies. As McFadden suggests, the West must also inoculate its populations and allies against Kremlin propaganda, much as Ukraine has done, and we must take the initiative and act to counter the propaganda across Russia itself. The myth of Novorossiya was a calculated attempt to rewrite history and undermine Ukraine's sovereignty. It was not merely an ideological project, but a pretext for war, a justification for what Ukrainian President Zelensky calls an international crime. While Russia frames its aggression as a defensive act against fascists and neo-colonialists, the truth is that Putin's regime is driven by an imperial nostalgia and a fear of democratic encroachment. Putin's propaganda machine is vast and insidious, and it has lulled many into accepting his narratives, many Russians, or worse, underestimating his power. Even in a fridge, Putin is powerful. And the West must exuviate, there's that word again, exuviate its complacency and meet Russia's disinformation campaign with a strategy that combines factual rebuttals with proactive storytelling. It's not enough to defend against missiles or hackers. We must also defend against myths. It's a sort of hit or myth. Novorossiya has failed once, but if left unchecked, Putin's propaganda will find new ways to justify its belligerence, both to his people and to the world. We need to be on our guard, and we need to be challenging the stories that he is telling, not only to the West, but also to his own people. We were able to do this during the Second World War. We did it marginally during the First World War. We seem to have forgotten what countering propaganda is all about. But it's about spreading the word that this propaganda is fake and doing it in Russian and doing it on his own back door. Because if we don't, we will live to regret it. We may already be too late. I hope not.